Do you think we ever get too old to start over? That's the question for today. Do you think we ever get too old to start over? Well, yes, maybe if we're too ill or infirm or in some way we're just incapable mentally or physically of starting over. Sure. But is age really an impediment to starting over just by the fact of its number? No, I don't think so. I mean, we spend all of our lives starting over if you think about it. You know, we're a child. When we hit 18, we either start over by going to college or we start a job or we just go out in the world to explore. We start over then. We start over again when we get married or have kids or, have a family, move to a different city. Those are all starting overs. And in fact, anytime you change a job, you're starting over. So we've learned to start over our whole lives. Very few people have not started over at least a few times. And starting over happens when you get divorced. You can start over again. In fact, you might do that multiple times. Same thing with a job. Same thing with moving to a new place. So we're very experienced at starting over. Most of us are by the time we hit 60 or 70 or above years of age. So is it possible to start over again, no matter how old you are? In theory, yes. Again, there are practical impediments to it potentially, but overall, yes. And I am a big believer in starting over. So I'm looking at now potentially starting over again after doing it for maybe, I don't know, at least 10 times in my life before. But this time feels different, and that's what prompted this video today, because I wanted to explore the idea of what is so difficult about starting over at my age, for instance, at 69, or maybe even at 60, or 75, or even 80. What is different and what is difficult about it? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and share kind of where my mind is on this, and then share some, I think, just basic good tips for how to plan a start over in your life, no matter what your age is. So let's talk first about a little bit about what is different about starting over when you're older. I think the biggest thing is that you're older. You're physically older, you're mentally older, you're worn down to some degree about life. You know, you've seen it all, you've done a lot of things in your life. Even if you don't have anything that's really directly preventing you making a big change in your life, it's still more daunting, I think, as we get older. And I think that's the biggest difficulty of starting over when you're older. I think a lot of it is just, we look at how old we are, we look at, we're not able to do quite as much as we could 20 years ago even. So we think about that, and that affects our decision about it. So I think, to me, that's the most difficult thing. I think some of the other difficulties are fear is different as you get older. Sometimes you have less fear about some things, but you have some more fears about other things. For instance, you're more afraid of losing the roof over your head as you get older, because being homeless and being an older person is not a great option. A lot of people have to do it, unfortunately, in the times we live in, but it is an unfortunate type of circumstance. And most of us, I was homeless the very first time in my life. I was homeless at 21 when I got out of college. I was homeless for a few months. I had a job, but I didn't make enough to afford my own place. And so I had a bunch of friends. So I basically slept on people's sofas for a couple of weeks at a time, and then I would move on to someone else. But I was effectively homeless. But it was a big adventure at that age. It didn't seem like very stressful or traumatizing, really. I think the aspect of homelessness as you get older is overwhelming sometimes. And so I think that's a big difference between making a big change and saying, oh, what's the worst that could happen? I might just be homeless for a while. It's not a big deal at 20 or 30, but maybe it is a big deal at 60 and above. So I think that's another thing that makes it difficult. I think we also feel more vulnerable as we get older, just in general. You know, a lot of people take advantage of older people and try to scam older people and things like that. And that's a very real issue, especially among senior citizens. So I think we're more worried about that, more alarmed about that, even possibly. So I think that's a real thing. You know, I had a comment, and I don't even remember who it was from because, frankly, she was kind of just spreading a lot of fear, and she left me this comment, and she basically said, "Oh, you know, you're crazy, or think about living overseas, you know, being older, like all these old women disappear all over the world." And I'm thinking, okay, I'm sure that happens to young women too. In fact, probably more often to young women than old women. But anyway, she was kind of fear mongering, but I do think that is a thing that kind of at least makes us stop and think for a minute. If we think, oh, are we too vulnerable in this situation? Would it be very different? You know, I traveled a lot in, you know, my 20s. I did very dangerous things when I was in the Peace Corps, and I was alone a lot. And if I had actually thought about everything that could potentially happen to me at the time, I wouldn't have probably even done it. So, and maybe that happens more today than it did back in the 70s. I'm sure it does. But the thing is that you can't let fear stop you, because most of the time, most people that travel to certain, I mean, if you travel to a really dangerous place, of course it's going to be more of a risk. But I mean, if you go to normal countries around the world that have probably less crime than even the US, I don't think it's a huge danger to travel, even if you're by yourself. But anyway, that's an aspect just related to travel and related to starting over. So I think those are the things that makes it more difficult. But what are the things that makes it easier? This is the part I love. What are the things that makes it easier to start over when you're older? First of all, you have a whole lifetime of experience. You have a lifetime of experience and knowledge of how to deal with situations, how to function in the world. And so if you've been able to do that when you're younger, and again, barring any, you know, mental or physical disabilities that would be significant, you have all this backlog of knowledge and experience to carry you through. I think that is a huge advantage to taking a risk and starting over when you're over 60. You've started over a lot more than somebody who's 30. You know what to do. You know what's involved. The thing I think that's the most important advantage of starting over after 60 is basically you've got a lot of motivation. You've got way more motivation than you probably had at 20 or 30. And the reason is your time is shorter. You want to make the most of your life. You don't know that the next time you do something could be the last time you do that thing. And so it takes on a lot more importance. You know, if you knew you only had one more move to make in your life, like you could just move one more time, you would really want to make it count, wouldn't you? But when you're 20 or 30, you're like, oh, I'll probably move lots of times in my life. It doesn't really matter what I do. So your motivation to make this successful and to make this count is even greater after 60. It really is. And I think that's what makes it so special. I'm really thinking about that in the context of the choices I have to make in the coming months. You know, for those of you who don't know, on this channel, I am now a monetized channel. I have been for over 3 months, or about 3 months. And that has changed everything. That has forced me to make changes. Like, a lot of them are not necessarily that I would have wanted to make a change, like my medical coverage, but it's forcing a change. Because with the extra income, I no longer qualify for the types of things I had before. And so I'm forced to make a change in my life, to have a new direction. So it's created all sorts of potentialities to me, but also a lot more questions and a lot more indecision and a lot more fear, all along encompassed with that. And so that's what kind of prompted me to think about this video today, was that I was like, wow, I'm facing this right now. I am actually going to have to start over at my age. in some way at least. I could do it in a very minor way, but I could also do it in a more major way. And I'm still in the process of deciding that and planning it, and I'm not going to go into that part of it. I'm sure in a future video I'll talk more about my actual decision process about a particular thing. But right now I'm in kind of the research mode of this, and that's what I would say. This kind of moves into the next part of this, which is, what do you need to do to make a good decision about starting over if you're older? And these would actually apply to people even younger making decisions starting over, honestly. But I think it's even more important when you're over 60. So the first thing is do your research. Do your research. And that means you might want to consult experts, not just anybody, but people who actually know about the thing you want to do. For instance, I want to go live overseas at some point. I'm not sure when exactly that will happen because that's part of the whole, unfolding of this. But one thing I will do is I'm going to consult somebody who is an expert at moving overseas to the country that I'm thinking about going. And so I'm going to consult with somebody to do that. I think you get rid of a lot of fear with knowledge. The more knowledge you have, the less fear there is, because you know certain things, you know what to expect. So I'd say that's the first thing. Do the research, including consult with any experts that you might be able to. The second thing is plan well. You have to plan. You actually have to make a plan. You have to say, well, okay, I'm going to need X amount of money to do this. Or let's say you want it. Maybe the starting over for you is, taking a big road trip or moving to just a different city in the U.S. You still have to plan. You have to plan how you want to do that. And you go through the steps and your research, that goes back to the research too. You plan based on your research. So I think that's an important step. And I think another important step is to deal with your fear. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? And then don't run away from it, but actually confront it and say, okay, and you might do that through journaling or making bullet points or whatever you need to do, but really confront that fear, because until you do, it's going to stand in your way. It's going to stand in your way. So that's an important thing. And then I think the last thing I would say, and this is, like I said, just general steps you want to take in this process. I think the last thing and the most important thing is to trust your gut. Trust your intuition. My intuition is really good at telling me when something isn't a good option for me or it is a good option for me. It's always been there. I haven't always listened to it my whole life, but it's always been there, and I've always been able to trust it because it's usually right. So if my intuition says this is a good, this is a good step, this is a good starting over for you, then I tend to believe it. But most people, I don't know if they really trust their gut, that they don't really trust that intuition. And I think most intuition is correct if you listen to it. So trust your gut. They always say that about, I remember when I used to live out of my van for a year. If you haven't watched that video, that's back about a year and a half ago. But I used to know where to stop to spend the night. I would trust my intuition. If an area didn't feel right to me, I would move on. And I've seen other van dwellers say the very same thing in their videos about it. And it's really true. So that's an example of trusting your intuition. It usually is right. Usually will tell you that something doesn't feel right about this. So when you're making a plan to start over, trust your gut on it. That's what I'd say, very important part. So I'd say do your research first, and then really think about what you want to do. And as you're planning, trust your gut. If your gut is going, oh no. Now, there's a difference between your intuition and fear, though, and you have to be able to discern the difference. Fear will always try to throw a monkey wrench into your plans. because fear's going, oh, I don't know if we can do that. That's different than intuition. And so sometimes you have to really journal that or meditate on it or whatever you need to do to think more clearly so that you're getting a clear message from the intuition rather than the fear. Because fear will try to masquerade as intuition sometimes, and it's not the same thing. I encourage you to not let fear hold you back from making an important change in your life if you feel like you can. Now, let's just talk about one more thing in this whole process of this. Finances have a lot to do with starting over. And if you have healthy finances and you got plenty of money, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So in that case, it's really just deciding what you want to do and when you want to do it. If your finances are more inconsistent, as mine is with YouTube income at this point, I'm still trying to figure out like what's an average here and what I can expect to some degree, which is hard to do. That makes it trickier making plans, because that's the biggest thing that's putting a wrench in my plans at this time is the finances of it. So that's something you have to figure out for yourself if you're making a change in your life. You know, I've known people that say, oh, I want to do this and want to do that, and they're poor. They don't have any money to do that. And I say, well, that's great to want to do that, but how are you going to do that if you don't have the money to do that? Do you have a plan for how you're going to get the money to do that? Because, you know, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to go and live in Europe until my YouTube channel got monetized. I just knew. So for the last 2 years that I've been having a channel, I knew darn well there was no way I could make a plan to do that. I didn't have enough income. Just wasn't going to happen. So yeah, would it have been nice to have gotten monetized 2 years ago? Absolutely, but that's not the way it worked out. So now I can start from this point and at least make a start. So back to my original question, do we ever get too old to start over? Not really. Not if you're, like I said, if you're in fairly good health and you have your mental faculties about you, I think yes. You can always start over. It's a matter of motivation and will. It's a matter of what do I want different in my life. You know, I don't think we're ever too old to want our lives to be better, to be more fulfilled, to be happier. And if we've not had a lot of that in our lives, it may be difficult to motivate ourselves to do that and to follow that. But I do believe that's everybody's birthright. Everybody at some point in their life should be able to go do something they really, really want to do. And if you couldn't do it when you were younger, then do it when you're older. So anyway, I hope that helps today. Until next time, be well, be kind, keep moving forward, and take care. Bye.